I didn't scream when I realized my marriage was over. I just sat there on the couch, staring at 2 phones on the table, feeling my chest tighten so much I thought my ribs might crack from the inside. From the outside, our life looked normal, comfortable, the kind of life people nod at and say, "You've got it figured out." We lived in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. Tree-lined streets, lawns cut on Saturdays, neighbors who waved but didn't ask too many questions. We'd been together almost 11 years, married for 7. No kids yet, but we talked about it in that vague, someday way. When things slow down, when work settles, when we feel ready. And it wasn't always rosy. It never is. But we got along. We laughed. We knew each other's routines, moods, silences. We argued about money sometimes, about stupid things like dishes left in the sink or lights left on. But nothing that felt dangerous. Nothing that made me think I was standing on the edge of something that could collapse. Most nights looked the same. Dinner, TV, phones in our hands, half present, half somewhere else. He'd scroll, I'd scroll. Our legs touching on the couch. That quiet, physical reassurance that says, we're still here. That night started like any other. It was raining outside, not a storm, just a steady, cold drizzle tapping against the windows. The living room was dim, lit by a single lamp near the couch. I remember the smell of coffee still lingering in the air from earlier, mixed with something dusty from the heater kicking on. I was sitting on the couch, leaning back, exhausted in that deep, bone-level way that doesn't go away with sleep. My shoulders felt heavy, my head ached behind my eyes. I'd had a long day at work, staring at screens, answering emails that never really end. He had gone to bed early, said he was tired. That wasn't unusual. I stayed up, scrolling without really seeing anything. At some point, my phone buzzed with a low battery warning. I leaned forward to grab the charger from the coffee table and noticed something that didn't belong there. Another phone. Not mine. Not the one he usually carried. It was face down, black, newer than his old one. I stared at it for a few seconds, my brain refusing to assign it meaning. My first thought was almost laughably innocent. Maybe it's a work phone. Or maybe a friend left it here. But my stomach tightened anyway. A slow sinking pull, like an elevator dropping a floor without warning. I picked it up. It felt heavier than it should have. Cold. Solid. Real. My hands were already shaking, just slightly. Not enough to drop it, but enough that I noticed. I remember pressing my thumb against the screen, leaving a faint smudge and hesitating. There was this brief moment where I could have put it back down, pretended I never saw it, walked to the kitchen, poured myself another drink, gone to bed. But my body didn't move that way. I sat back down on the couch, my knees bent inward, my elbows rested on them without me really deciding to do it. The room felt too quiet all of a sudden, like the sound had been turned down. The phone lit up, no lock screen photo, no notifications previewed, just a plain black background and the time glowing back at me. I swallowed, my throat dry, and unlocked it. And that was the moment something inside me shifted. Not exploded, not shattered. Just slipped, like a gear grinding out of place. Messages. So many messages. A name I didn't recognize at first. A woman's name. Casual. Familiar. The kind of name you'd never suspect of ruining your life. My breathing went shallow. I noticed it because I had to consciously force air into my lungs. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a belt around it and pulled. I wasn't crying yet. I wasn't even fully thinking. I was just scrolling. My finger moved slowly, deliberately, as if moving too fast might make the words disappear. Every message felt like a small physical impact. A dull hit to the stomach. A pinch behind the eyes. Heat rising in my face. They weren't explicit, not at first. They were worse than that. Inside jokes, daily check-ins, complaints about work, comments about being tired, being stressed, being misunderstood, things he used to say to me. I looked up for a second, staring at the dark TV screen across the room. My reflection stared back at me, pale and frozen. The lamp buzzed faintly. The rain kept tapping against the window, steady and indifferent. I noticed my hands were gripping the phone too tightly. My fingers ached. I loosened them and rested the phone on the coffee table. That's when I saw mine lying next to it. 2 phones, side by side, one with our life, one with something else entirely. I leaned back into the couch, the cushions pressing into my spine, and stared up at the ceiling. My eyes burned. Tears pooled but didn't fall yet. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I remember thinking I should stand up. But my legs wouldn't respond. My body felt heavy, like gravity had doubled. like sitting there was the only thing I was capable of doing. This wasn't a one-night mistake. This wasn't flirting gone too far. This was a second life, quietly running parallel to mine while I folded laundry, paid bills, planned holidays, and believed him when he said everything was fine. And as I sat there, alone in our living room, listening to the rain and the hum of the house, I realized something terrifying. I didn't know when it started. I didn't know how long it had been going on. And I had no idea who I'd been married to all this time. I stayed on that couch for a long time after that, long enough for the room to feel unfamiliar, like I was sitting in someone else's house, wearing someone else's life. At some point, my eyes drifted back to the phone. I picked it up again, slower this time. My hands felt numb, like the nerves were dulled. I noticed how quiet everything was, the heater clicking on and off, the rain still tapping, steady and patient like it had all the time in the world. I started reading more carefully. The messages went back months, then further. I scrolled until my thumb ached, until the screen blurred and I had to stop and blink hard to refocus. There were gaps where whole conversations were clearly missing, probably deleted. That realization alone made my stomach twist. This wasn't accidental. This was managed. There were photos too. Not graphic, not explicit, but intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. Selfies taken in places I recognized. Our bathroom mirror, our guest room, our backyard, where I'd planted flowers last spring. I pressed my lips together, tasting something metallic. I realized I'd been clenching my jaw for so long my temples throbbed. My shoulders were tight, drawn up toward my ears, and I had to consciously drop them, forcing myself to breathe out. I felt stupid for not noticing. That thought came next, sharp and immediate. I replayed the last year in my head, like surveillance footage, late nights, work calls. The way he'd tilt his phone slightly away from me, the way he'd smile at messages and then look up and act normal like nothing had happened. I'd noticed those things. I just hadn't connected them. My phone buzzed suddenly on the table, and I flinched so hard my heart jumped into my throat. It was just a notification from some app. Nothing important. But my hands were shaking now, visibly. I wrapped my fingers together, pressing them tight, trying to steady them. I thought about waking him up, marching into the bedroom, holding the phone out in front of me like evidence, demanding answers, yelling, crying. But the idea of standing up felt overwhelming, like asking my body to run a marathon, with broken legs. So I sat there, and I kept reading. The deeper I went, the worse it got. Complaints about me, about our life, about how he felt stuck, about how I wouldn't understand. Things he'd never said out loud, things he'd smiled through instead. I felt something cold settle in my chest, not just pain, something heavier, something closer to fear. Because the man in those messages wasn't the man I knew. He was softer with her, more open, more honest, or at least honest in a way he'd stopped being with me. I pressed my fingers against my sternum like I could physically hold myself together. My breathing was shallow again. Each inhale felt incomplete. At some point, tears started falling. Quietly. I didn't sob. I didn't make a sound. They just slid down my face and dripped off my chin, landing on my sweater and disappearing into the fabric. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, then realized I was smearing mascara everywhere. I laughed once, softly under my breath. Not because anything was funny, just because the absurdity of it all hit me at once. I sat there crying on a couch we picked out together, holding a phone that didn't belong in my life, wearing the sweater he'd given me for Christmas last year. Eventually, I heard movement from the bedroom, the creak of the mattress, footsteps down the hall. My body reacted before my mind did. My stomach dropped, my spine went rigid. I set the phone down on the table, face up this time, right next to mine. He stopped in the doorway. I didn't look at him at first. I was staring at the two phones like they were some kind of proof that I wasn't imagining things. He said my name. His voice sounded normal, sleepy, concerned. I looked up then. My eyes burned. My face felt swollen. I knew I must have looked wrecked, but I didn't care. He followed my gaze. The silence stretched. Thick. Heavy. The rain outside suddenly sounded. Loud again. I watched his face change in small increments. Confusion, recognition, panic. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I waited. My hands were folded tightly in my lap now, fingers digging into my palms. My legs felt weak, like they might give out even though I was already sitting. Finally, he spoke. He didn't deny it. That hurt more than anything else. He started talking fast, words tumbling over each other, explaining, justifying, minimizing, saying it, wasn't what it looked like. Saying it didn't mean anything. Saying it just happened. I listened, but it felt like I was underwater. His voice sounded muffled, distorted. I focused instead on small details, the way his hair stuck up on one side, the faint crease between his eyebrows, the familiar rhythm of his speech. I noticed my heart wasn't racing anymore. It was heavy, slow, like it had sunk. I asked him how long. He hesitated. That pause told me everything. When he finally answered, it was longer than I expected. Long enough that my vision dimmed at the edges for a second. I had to grab the arm of the couch to steady myself. Months of lying next to me, months of eating dinner across from me, months of touching me, kissing me, telling me he loved me. Something inside me folded inward then, not dramatically, quietly, like a structure giving way under too much weight. I realized I wasn't angry yet. I was numb, and that scared me more than anything else. He kept talking, like if he filled the room with enough words, he could cover what he'd done. My hands were still in my lap, fingers pressed so hard my nails bit my skin. I asked him one question, whether he loved her. He looked away, blinked, said he didn't know, said it was complicated. That tiny pause broke something in me. I stood up too fast and the room swayed. Tears came hot and silent, my throat tightening until it hurt, to swallow. He reached for me out of habit, like I was still his to steady, and I stepped back so sharply my heel bumped the coffee table. One of the phones slid, the screen flashing on, cold light spilling across the wood. I told him not to touch me. The words came out rough, like my voice had been scraped raw. He tried again, therapy, deleting numbers. We can fix this. I watched his mouth move and couldn't match it to the man in those messages. It felt like looking at someone I'd never met. I walked to the kitchen on legs that didn't feel like mine. The tile was icy under my bare feet. I poured water, took one sip, and my hand shook so badly it spilled onto the counter. I stared at the droplets spreading and thought, stupidly, how I'd be the one to wipe them up. When I came back, I told him to sleep in the guest room. Not as a punishment, just because the idea of sharing a bed with him made my skin crawl. That night, I locked the bedroom door. I lay, awake listening to the rain and the heater clicking, my chest tight, then hollow. Every time I closed my eyes, those messages replayed like a loop. In the morning, sunlight cut through the blinds in thin stripes. It hit the carpet, the dresser, the framed photo of us smiling somewhere warm. I looked at that photo and a wave of nausea rolled through me so hard I had to sit down. I called my sister before I could talk myself out of it. My voice sounded steady, which scared me. When she answered, I finally said it. There was a second phone, a second relationship, and I didn't know who my husband was. After that, everything turned practical. Bank accounts, a spare key, a bag packed quietly while he was at work. A few days at my sister's place turned into weeks. He texted apologies, he begged. Then he got angry that I wouldn't talk it through. I learned betrayal doesn't stop at discovery. It keeps echoing at stoplights, in grocery aisles, in the quiet, seconds before sleep. I don't have a clean ending. No dramatic revenge, no perfect closure, just this. I walked away from a life that looked fine from the outside, and I chose the truth, even when it hurt to carry.